Hi, I'm Tiffany Winchester, and I'm here with Anne Wallen, and we've been having conversations over the last few days about writing assignments based on journal articles. And Anne and I both teach very different subjects within the business school, and we realized that a lot of our students are asking the same questions, which is, why do I have to use journal articles? Where do I look for with a journal article? How do I read so many articles and find out information? And really, which is the subject of our discussion here, how do I read a journal article without losing consciousness? So Anne and I have put together this presentation, which we're hoping provides some insight and some help into what to do when faced with the assignment that asks you to reference 5, 10, 15, 30 journal articles. How do you even get started? So what we thought we'd start off with is maybe just outlining why we want you to cite journal articles. What's the difference between why can't you just use a whole bunch of different textbooks? Why can't I just use some websites? And why journal articles are so important. So I think we'll start with books. When you have like your unit guide, your course outline, the first thing we give you is, of course, the textbook that we're going to use in that particular course. And these are really good as a very good starting point. So it summarizes a lot of information. It can be really good at explaining the topic area. They're quite easy to read. But one of the downsides of books is, of course, the time frame is very long from the time that you start writing that textbook until it actually gets published.
Absolutely. Also, you find with books that they're quite general, and the assignments that you're writing on are focused on a specific question. So you're not going to be able to find the information that you want on that specific question in a generalized textbook.
That's right. So books are a great place to start. Another thing that's really handy with your textbook is if you look at the back of that particular chapter, say you're looking at a chapter in, quantitative methodology and you need more information on that, you can look at the back of that textbook chapters and it'll usually give you a list of references which contain journal articles of which you can look up more information on a specific area. Something else that you'll find is the difference between looking at websites and looking at journal articles per se. Websites can be really useful. They can offer you much broader perspectives. They're very easy to read. They can be industry-based, government reports, data. But there are some downsides of publishing and looking on the web.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, websites can be really, really helpful to, I guess, situate yourself in context. Often it's a great thing to read a couple of blogs or some newspaper articles around your topic to really situate yourself in the issues that are generally occurring. So say in a particular industry or a particular problem in marketing, say it's consumer rage or things like that, it can be great to go and have a look at it as a general start to get yourself thinking about your topic. But as you said, there's a couple of downsides if you want to use it further than that.
Yeah, because one of the things is anyone can publish on the web. This is one of the reasons why tend to be in academia we argue that you shouldn't be using Wikipedia, because anyone can publish anything on the web. The other thing too is that when you're reading industry reports online, they tend not to give you where the author got that particular information from. So you're taking their word for it that they found this wherever they found it. It's actual factual information. So from a textbook, you can look at a reference list. From a website, it's very difficult, and it's where do you go next, because the author rarely references where the information came from. So that leads us to journal articles. Journal articles go through a peer review process, which means that as an academic, I would submit an article to a journal. They would then pass that on to other peers in my field who would look at my work, give me advice on how to fix it, make sure it's at the academic level that it needs to be published, make sure that my information is factual and that all the content is correct before it gets published. Journal articles also contain scholarly information, and they're written by professionals in the field. And as Adam said with the books, journal articles then give you that more specific information on what you're looking for. Time frame on a journal article is not as quick as a web, but it doesn't tend to be as long as with a book. And with journal articles, which is going to be the main focus of our discussion, if you want to find more information, you can look at the reference list, which then gives you a where to go to next. So one of the questions that we get is, how do I even know where to start looking for a journal article? So there's lots of options out there. A good one to start is your university library database. As you can see on the bottom right-hand side of the screen, Anne and I are using the UQ library and the Deakin library as examples of where you can start looking. However, what we're going to look for to make this a really general approach to looking for journal articles is we're going to use Google Scholar, and what we're going to show you is how to set your library database up within Google Scholar so that you're using that as your main source of information. So here's a little bit on how to set up Google Scholar. If you go to Google Scholar right now, and you can Google Google Scholar to find what the website link is here, and you type in something like consumer behavior and hit enter, what you're going to find is, as you see in the screenshot, is a whole bunch of links, but once you start clicking through them, they're going to ask you to do things like pay for the PDF or show them money or enter in your university's information in order to find that article, which can be very frustrating because, of course, as students, we don't have access to that many funds to randomly look for an article. So what you want to do is you want to link your library's database in through Google Scholar. So if you go back to the home page, on the top bar you'll see this sort of example here. So what you're looking for is this cog type icon that says settings. Click on that, and then the next thing that'll pop up, if you look on the left hand side of the screen, is a whole bunch of links, and look for the one that says library links and click on that. The next page that you'll pop to has a search engine bar. In there type in your name, so Deakin University, UQ Library, whatever it is, wherever you are, you can click your library in there and hit enter. The list of universities will come up, click on the empty box next to it, it'll put a tick box in there, and then hit save. The next time you go into Google Scholar and type in your search, what you'll see is on the right hand side, for example at Deakin, a box will pop up that says find it at Deakin, and this is here the key link that you're going to look for to find out more information on these articles. Okay, so you're not clicking on the actual link of the article, you're clicking to the right hand link of the article where it says find it at Deakin, look for me at UQ, whatever it is your university library that you've linked to will pop up on the right hand side. Now go back into Google Scholar. What you'll see, just for those of you that have never used this before, is you've got a couple of different options in terms of how you want to search. Just like with Google, you can type in anything and whatever you like into that search area and hit search. If you're looking for a bit more specific information or an advanced search, just drop the pull down arrow on the right hand side, and that'll give you options like if you want to include all the words, if you want it in the title of the word, if you're looking for a specific author or a frame range or a specific journal, all of these can be entered into the search here. So a really good place to start is with your topic area. So for example, if you're looking up consumer boycotting, you can type that into the search area. Or you might be looking for a particular theory area. So for example, in marketing, we look up consumer segmentation and positioning or consumer behavior or whatever the theory area is that you're looking for. Another option if you're faced with like a case study type of an example is to then look up the specific industry. You can look that into the search bar. So for example, the bread industry or bakery. But keep in mind that a lot of articles aren't written necessarily for the industry that you've been given as a case study. So by starting off with just looking at that industry, it might be very limiting and not give you a lot of articles. So I'm just going to show you an example. I know one of the problems, and this is the exact same problem when we Google anything, is that when you type in something that's not specific, you will get a phenomenal number of searches that it's going to come up. So, for example, I might start out with looking for segmentation. So if I type in segmentation, you can see by the example here, I'm going to get 1.9 million articles, which is quite overwhelming if you think that I have to start going through all of those articles. But one of the things that you'll notice if you do type in the search and example and start reading through them, articles about segmentation in physics or particle physics or chemistry, nursing segmentation of different elements of that, so it's not really specific to the field that you might be looking in. So start narrowing down your term. So if I look up marketing segmentation, I then get just over 200,000 hits. If I then do the drop-down box that I showed you on the last screen, and I say that I only want it from a journal, so that's about the second to the bottom, the screen that comes up, search for articles in, and just type in journal, that of course will limit you to anything that's the journal of whatever, marketing for example. So if I do that, then I actually end up with 51,000 hits. And then if I say, actually I only want articles that have been published in a journal that's about marketing segment from the last 2 years, which is the bottom screen here, I have about 8,000.
This is a really good way also to put in specifics from your assignment. So a lot of assignments will have date ranges, like we want articles in the last 5 years, or we want from peer review journals. So using the search functionality in Google Scholar means you're not spending your time looking at journal articles that don't meet the criteria for your assignment. So it's a really good idea to put your search term, to put in filters on the searching that match the criteria for your assignment. That way you're not wasting time.
Exactly. So here's sort of, I got this from Anne, and I thought this was an excellent way of starting your collection. One of the things that you might be faced with is a certain number of peer review articles that you have to have that we'd like you to source. And that's not that we just want you to keep searching for articles until your head explodes. It's usually so that you can have a really good theoretical base, or at least a good supporting evidence for your assignment. So how do you even start a collection of journal articles? Because if you, as I said with the last slide, if you start searching, you've got 8,000 to start from, and that's just on segmentation alone, and it starts getting really quite overwhelming. So what we would suggest is to start making a folder.
Absolutely. So this is the first part of your task, is really just starting the search and keeping that organized. So first you can make a folder. Again, pay attention to how many articles generally is being given as a guidance that you'll need. For my subject, it's around 10. So you'd want to start looking and searching for, say, 20 articles, because not all of them are going to be applicable in the final amount. Do you want to take them through links?
Yeah, so when we say make a folder, I guess some of you are kind of going, like, make a folder within Scholar. This is just something simple as within the assignment piece on your laptop, that just make a new folder that says, like, assignment articles that I'm looking at. This is not any fancy terms or technical terminology that we're looking at. So make a folder, set yourself a starting limit. So say, for example, like we've got 20. Once you've started doing your search, and you want to start looking through the articles, so for example, the example that we had before, type in some search terms, find an article that the title looks interesting. That's always a good place to start. And then click on that link on the right-hand side. So for example, at Deakin, it's called Find It at Deakin. For UQ, it's Get It at UQ Library. Once you click on that link, though, so again, this is the link on the right-hand side of the screen, not the article itself. Once you click on that link, you might be taken to another page that has a list of where the full text can be found. Usually, the first 2 links are going to be your best bet, because those are most likely where you're going to find that article. So start clicking that link. The next screen, for those of you that have never signed into the library before, or have turned off your computer and turned it back on again, the next screen will take you out of Google Scholar and onto your particular university's library page, where you'll need to sign into the library via your student details. Once you've done this once, you will never see this again while you're currently doing your search. Okay? So click through the article. The first thing you're going to see is some sort of page, and again, I can't show you an exact screenshot because every journal article publishes a slightly different screenshot, so you're going to have to kind of, use your own judgment as to what you're looking at. But the first thing to read is actually the abstract. So the abstract is an overview of what the research is about, what it did, how they did it, what they found, sort of just a general overview of what this whole article is about. For those of you used to reading, say, research reports or marketing reports, this is very similar to an executive summary. So this is what you're looking at here, is the abstract. So have a look at the abstract. Does it look vaguely relevant? Does it look interesting? Does it have keywords that you want for? Because often the title might not be as indicative of the research content as you'd like it to be. So read your abstract. If it looks like it's interesting, look through that website and you will find somewhere on it that says PDF. Okay? Download the PDF of your article and then save that to your folder. Once you've collected 20, then, or whatever your number is, I mean, it could even be 5. If you've never done any article searching before, start with a small number. Okay? You don't want to overwhelm yourself. Doing PDFs to a folder is not really where the hard work is. Okay? This is an excellent start, but that's not the be-all to end-all.
Also, this is a way of kind of breaking up the tasks in a literature review. So this can be a discrete task. So if you're struggling with starting, maybe you can sit down for an hour and say, I'm going to search for some articles to add into the folder. Don't be too worried about going further than the abstract right now. It's really about getting a collection of articles that really great to start your assessment. And that can be a distinct task, maybe an hour or 2 hours, and then you can step back again before you lose that consciousness that we were trying to save all along.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, so for those of you, if you're having a tired day and you're like, oh, I really want to work on my assignment, but I'm not feeling up to my best, I'm really tired, this is a great start. This is like that breaking the ice almost in an assignment. We know that the first part of an assignment that's hardest to do is that blank piece of paper, writing something down. So how do I start a search? Collect just a few articles, because at least you've got now somewhere to start from. So the next here is how to read a journal article.
Okay, so we've got some do's and don'ts. So we're envisaging that you've finished your search for now. You may always need to go back and do that step again, depending on how it goes. But for now, you've got a folder full of journal articles. And this is often where I find my students getting the most anxious at the next step in the task. So the most important point is that a journal article is not a novel, it's not a book, and there's some really clear do's and don'ts that help you guide your way through an article without it getting overwhelming. So the first don't we have is don't treat it like a book. Think of a journal article as a reference material, so something that you need to have a look at in order to get information. So the worst thing you can do with an article is start at the start and end at the end and expect that at the end of the journal article you're going to know what to do. So that's our second don't. Don't expect it to give you the answer. Often assignments using journal articles are about you piecing together different perspectives, different variables in my case, and coming up with your own solution that's unique to you. So no journal article is going to tell you exactly what the answer is for your particular assignment.
Yeah, so the journal article, what we're trying to say is you don't read it like a book. It's not like if I needed to know information, I wouldn't pick up a dictionary and start at A and just start reading until I found the answer. Most of the time, you're looking at an article to answer a specific question. So you want to do things like scanning and skimming the article at first. So give it a quick look. Even do something as simple as read the headers as you go along, read the first sentence of the headers, sort of just an overview of what it's about. Once that looks like it might have information in it that you would be interested in, ask a question. I mean, you're not going to, it's not a metaphorical question like, hey, journal article, please give me the insights as to what I'm looking for. But most of the time you're looking for something specific. So if we go back to the segmentation example we were looking at before, it might be that I'm looking for how to segment a particular market, or what segmentation bases could I use, or what segmentation bases are effective in the industry that I'm looking at, who's done segmenting before. And I'm looking in the article to address a specific question. So you're looking for something really specific. Or it could be also that you have an opinion as to what you think might happen. And we always talk in class about, as much as I value your opinion, I'm not really interested in it when I'm reading your assignment. I'm looking for well-supported, argued, evidence-based fact. So it might be that you have an opinion on how you could segment a particular market. So then what you're doing in the journal article is looking for something in that article to support or even contradict your point of view.
Whereas for my students, they're often looking to see what types of variables other people have looked at in order to solve a particular problem. So they have a different focus. So already we have 3 totally different sets of questions that all use journal articles to answer them. And really it's about that question telling you which parts of the articles you're going to be able to go in and read without having to start at the start and end at the end.
Yeah, so that exact thing, this particular slide, which is how do you dissect an article. Most articles, almost all articles, have a very clear framework of how they are set up. So most of them start, and again, these headings might not be exactly the words that you're using, but this is generally the flow of an article. So it starts with your introduction. The introduction, which is usually the first, say, page, maybe 2 pages of the journal article, gives you a general understanding of the paper. What's been done before, what's the field of research, why is it important, justify why you need to do further research, identify some gaps in the literature. And then really at the end of the introduction, it tends to describe the aim of the paper and the contribution. So if you were reading through the introduction, you might skip to sort of the end of this section to go, what is this paper really going to talk about? Following that is usually some discussion of the literature. So what's been done before, who's done what have done in what context and where, really looking at what do we currently know about whatever topic that it is that we're looking at. Sometimes in the lit review you might have a discussion on the variables that they're going to use in the study. They might have a list of hypotheses or research questions or schools of thought. But really at the end of the literature section they're going to tell you what the question is that they're going to answer with this particular set of work. Following that, they're then going to give you a method discussion. So how did they go out and solve the particular problem? Now again, there's some debate as to whether you should really read in depth the method section. Different instructors will have different schools of thoughts on this, so you really want to talk to your instructor in terms of whether they want you to read the method section. For a marketing course, which is what I'm teaching, and I usually tell my students to kind of skim through this section very lightly, unless they're looking for something detailed on a methodological approach, because this isn't what we're looking at specifically. So you might want to sort of just breeze through this question, especially if you find that the article is overwhelming. This is usually a good section to kind of skip over at the beginning when you're doing a very general look at an article. The last sort of two sections is the research and the discussion. So what did they find out, how did they do it, and what does it mean? That's really the key part of the article. And then of course the conclusion at the end of the paper talks about an overview view of the paper. So what were they trying to answer, what did they find out, why it's important, what are the limitations we go to next. So in terms of reading an article, as Anne and I were saying before, you really need to figure out what are you looking for in this paper in terms of which of these main sections are you going to focus on.
Absolutely. So this is really the key to not losing consciousness while reading a journal article. Once you break down the questions you need to ask, and there may be several across the stages of your assignment, then it's going to guide you as to which section of the article, not the whole article, which section of the article you're going to need to look at in any particular time period. So, for example, my students start off needing to look at the different variables that people are using. So they might go in for a session of looking at the literature review just to log, perhaps in an Excel spreadsheet, what kinds of variables are people connecting to a particular dependent variable or a particular problem. So they would essentially leave the rest of the article till later and just deal with literature reviews. So just looking for that title, literature review. Therefore, an article that could be 15 or 17 pages turns into a 2 or 3 page little piece that you can dissect and then step back away from the article before you lose consciousness.
Absolutely.
Then they would say move on to looking at methods or measurement. They could then spend another period stepping back in. They would use just the method section and then step back out. So this is what we mean by reference. Think about the question, where can I find that information in the article? Step into the articles for that section only, and then step back out. You shouldn't be confused about what you're aiming to find, I guess is my key point.
Absolutely. So are you looking for any particular content in the article? Are you looking for, as Anne said, important factors? You might just be looking at different ways that you might define a particular context. So my own research, I'll look at different definitions of, say, political marketing, because everyone has a slightly different angle, and I might be reading the article just for looking at how they define that particular term. You might also be looking for them to prove something to you, or in my case, for most of my students, you're looking for somewhere in the article where they say segmentation is a really good idea, or segmentation does not work in this particular context, and you're actually looking in the article for that element of discussion. Okay. So that kind of leads us to where then do you cite from in the article? And there's sort of two, again, we're skipping the method section for this particular discussion, but again, if you're working on a market research report and specifically looking at the methodology, then that's, that would be another section that you'd be looking at. But really, based on the examples that we've been giving here, there's really two areas that you're going to be looking at. One is the literature review, or the measures or the constructs or the factors, which is early on in the paper. Or you're looking at the discussion and conclusion, which is later on in the paper towards the end. Now, keeping in mind that in a lit review, they're really reviewing others' contributions to the field. This is not their own, it doesn't tend to be their own work. They might provide some evaluation or judgment on the work that's been done in that field, but really a lit review is a review of the current literature. So this is a really good source as well for future references. So say, for example, you read in the lit review that Brown and Smith say equals B. So Brown and Smith argue that segmentation exercises are pointless because of there's no differences between brands. Okay? Say you read that in the lit review, then actually if you want to cite that, you might want to go and find Brown and Smith's paper, read their argument in there, and then cite that particular paper. The discussion and the conclusion, on the other hand, tends to be the author's contribution. It's their finding, it's their conclusion. So if you want to cite that particular paper, you really want to be citing the discussions and conclusions section rather than the lit review. Yeah. Okay, so then the last bit is then once you are going to cite that paper, how do you do it? And it really comes down to two elements. If you're citing any sort of article that you've read, anything that's not an original contribution, so it's not your own thinking, it's an author's contribution, and really at whatever level of study that you're at, most likely you're going to be citing someone else's contribution because you're supporting your own thinking with others' contribution to the literature. So then it comes down to, do I quote or do I paraphrase? So I've given two examples here, and really at any level of study that's sort of, undergraduate, postgraduate, MBA, we want you to limit the amount of quotes that you're using.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That is across the board. So there's very few assignments where you'll need to quote more than a couple of times in a particular assignment. Yeah. And it's really because quotes are used for different things, from paraphrasing.
Yeah, so quote is when you take, basically you're copying exactly what was used in the article and you're putting it into your own work, okay? With quotes around it to signify that you got that exact quote from another piece of work. So the example that I've given you here is from an article by Harris and Locke from 2010, and the actual quote from the article reads, "It is frequently forgotten by political commentators and academics that the majority of voters do not share their fascination with politics." End quote, page number from that particular article. So these quotes around that signifies that I took that exact phrase from the article and I'm referencing it in my assignment. However, when you're using a lot of quotes in an assignment, the problem is that the more you're quoting other people, the less you are actually writing as a student. So it might be, say for example, that you quote, say, 2/3 of your assignment. You actually did not write 2/3 of your assignment. So as a marker, it makes it very difficult for us to read and to assess what is your contribution to the piece of work.
Absolutely. So think of it as a signal to your markers. So if you're looking at a piece of work and it's over-quoted, so there's a lot of things where you could have said something insightful, you could have made the links between things, but you chose to let another author do that for you. It's essentially saying that you didn't make that link, you didn't insight. Yeah. So the most common thing, the most common time my students use quotes is actually for definitions. So when there's a definition and you are mirroring that definition in your own work, then there is no point you trying to paraphrase that. It's much better if you just take a quote, because often the wordings are really specific and there's no better way to say it. Often I tell my students that you use a quote when there is absolutely no better way to say it, or when you can't synthesize it any further. So it's really the end point.
Yeah, so a quote is good if there's no better way that you can change the information without actually changing what that quote is. Problem with quotes, as Anne has discussed, is that the more quotes you use, the less likely I am to assume that you understand what you're talking about. Okay, so really what we would tend to ask you to do for most of your work is to paraphrase. Okay, so paraphrase is basically writing what that quote is in your own words. Okay, so you're not like for example the Harris and Locke quote, I wouldn't paraphrase this by saying it is often not remembered by political commentators and people that work in university that many people who vote do not share their enthusiasm with, that's not actually paraphrasing, that's just changing a couple of the words in the particular quote. So that's not what we mean by paraphrasing. Paraphrasing is just moving that quote around and using it in your own words. So this particular example here is obviously not from a direct quote, because the reason I use that quote is because it's so good. But for example, what I've got here, and this is how you paraphrase and reference, is I've put a previous call within the discipline of political marketing suggested that more focus needs to take place on the voter as a consumer. That's not what they wrote specifically in their paper. That was me phrasing it to match my writing style, to match how I speak and how I use terminology.
Absolutely. So paraphrasing, if you're paraphrasing well, you're essentially looking at the information and then applying it to your particular context. So for each of these assignments, you're asked a specific question, or you're creating a specific question, or you're trying to support a particular argument. And a lot of the material that you're looking at wasn't written for that purpose. So your job as the student is to look at all the information out there, as we've discussed, and to use your judgment to paraphrase and pull together different pieces of supporting evidence. So paraphrasing allows you to make links across articles, or to help people understand the argument in your context, or how it applies to your particular problem.
Yeah, absolutely. So paraphrasing is really important. This is really what we're expecting you to do at any sort of higher education level, is to take what the author says, change it into your own words, apply it to your own particular context, but still maintaining that you have to then cite their original idea from the article that it came from. So that's it. That's the end of our discussion. We hope that you found this really useful, and best of luck with all your studies.
Absolutely.